I stayed quiet while they laughed at me across the dinner table. I let them believe I was weak, broke, and desperate. They never realized my silence was hiding the truth that would destroy them. My name is Elena Carter, and for most of my life, I was the quiet one in my family, the one people talked over, laughed at, and blamed when things went wrong. That night at the dinner table was no different. My mother sat at the head like a queen, her posture stiff, lips tight with disappointment she never bothered to hide. My father barely looked up from his phone, scrolling as if my existence was background noise. My older brother, Marcus, leaned back in his chair, smirking the way he always did when he sensed weakness. And me, I sat there silently, hands folded in my lap, listening. So, Marcus said, dragging out the word, Elena's still working that little bookstore job. My mother sighed dramatically. Someone has to do something small, I suppose. Small. That word followed me everywhere. I nodded once. Yes, that was all I said. I didn't explain that I worked there by choice. I didn't tell them I had other plans. I had learned years ago that explaining myself only gave them more ammunition. My father finally looked up. You're almost 26. You should have something to show for your life by now. I swallowed the familiar knot in my throat. I'm working on it. Marcus laughed. You always are. They talked about me as if I weren't there. About how I never lived up to expectations. How I'd wasted my education. How I'd never be like Marcus, successful, confident, loud. No one mentioned the truth. They didn't mention how I'd pay my own way through college after they cut me off at 19. They didn't mention how I slept in my car for 3 months when my mother said, "You're an adult now. Figure it out." They didn't mention how every time I asked for help, it came with strings so tight they felt like chains. Instead, my mother cleared her throat. Your father and I have made a decision. Those words always meant trouble. We're selling the house, she said calmly, and restructuring the family assets. Marcus raised his eyebrows. Finally, I looked up. What does that mean? My father leaned forward, folding his hands. It means everything will be transferred to Marcus. He understands business. You don't. The room felt suddenly cold. You're cutting me out, I asked quietly. My mother tilted her head. You never contributed. Why should you benefit? I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded. Okay, I said. That single word shocked them more than if I'd cried. Marcus blinked. That's it. Yes. Inside, something cracked, but not in the way they thought. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was clarity. They had taken everything from me before. My room, my savings, my sense of belonging. But there was one thing they never noticed. The one thing I kept. Later that night, I lay on my mattress in my tiny studio apartment, staring at the ceiling as traffic hummed outside. I pulled my laptop onto my chest and opened a folder labeled private. Inside were documents, contracts, emails, and accounts things I had quietly built over years while they were busy underestimating me. I smiled for the first time that day. They thought I was nothing. They were wrong. And soon, they were going to find out exactly who I really was. Asterisk, the next morning, I woke up before my alarm. That wasn't unusual. When you grow up walking on eggshells, your body learns not to rest too deeply. Even now, years after moving out, the habit stuck. I lay there for a moment, listening to the city wake-up cars passing, someone shouting on the street below, the distant siren that never seemed to stop in this part of town. This was my life now. Small apartment, secondhand furniture, a job my family loved to mock, and total freedom. I dressed quietly, slipping into jeans and a plain sweater, the same kind of clothes I always wore. Nothing expensive, Nothing eye-catching. I had learned early that blending in was safer. People ignored you when you looked ordinary. Before leaving, I opened my laptop again. The folder was still there. Private. Inside it were years of careful work spreadsheets, contracts, incorporation papers, and correspondence that no one in my family had ever asked about. They'd never been curious enough. They saw what they wanted to see: the disappointment daughter, the forgettable sister. I closed the laptop and smiled faintly. At the bookstore, the bell chimed as I walked in. The smell of old paper and coffee wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. This place had saved me more times than I could count. When I had nowhere to go, they gave me shifts. When I had no money, they let me work extra hours. When my confidence was shattered, they trusted me with responsibility. Morning, Elena, said Mrs. Howard from behind the counter. Morning. You look lighter today, she said, squinting at me. I shrugged. Just slept well. It wasn't a lie. There was something freeing about knowing the worst had already happened. My family had officially written me off. No more pretending. No more waiting for approval that would never come. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Mom, we need your signature on some paperwork. Come by tonight. No, please. No explanation. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Me. Okay. I could almost hear her satisfied sigh through the screen. In her mind, this was proof I was still obedient, still controllable. She had no idea. That evening, I stood outside my childhood home, the one they were so eager to sell. The lights inside glowed warm and inviting, the way they always had for everyone except me. I took a breath and rang the bell. Marcus opened the door, wearing a smug grin and an expensive watch I knew my parents had bought him. Well, look who showed up, he said. Still living in that showbox. I smiled politely. Nice to see you too. Inside, my parents had spread papers across the dining table. Legal documents, transfer agreements, pages and pages of words designed to make one thing clear. I was no longer part of the future they were building. My father slid a pen toward me. Sign here. I skimmed the pages slowly, pretending to read for the first time. In reality, I had seen contracts like these before, better ones, more complex ones. I noticed the loopholes immediately. The rushed language, the assumptions. They thought I didn't understand. You don't have questions? My mother asked. Suspicious. I shook my head. No. I signed. Marcus let out a satisfied laugh. Smartest thing you've done in years. I handed the pen back, calm and steady. I hope it works out for you. They didn't catch the tone. No one ever did. As I stood to leave, my mother added casually, Oh, Elena, don't expect help in the future. This is it. I turned and met her eyes. I know, I said softly, and I meant something very different than she thought. Back in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and opened my laptop again. This time, I added today's signed documents to my files. Cross-referenced. Noted. Everything mattered. Every detail. They believed tonight was the end of my story. In reality, it was only the moment they finally stopped watching me. And when people stop watching you, that's when you're most dangerous. The first rule of survival I ever learned was simple. When people think you're powerless, they stop paying attention. My family had stopped watching me years ago. The day after I signed those papers, my phone stayed quiet. No messages, no calls, no sudden guilt or second thoughts. To them, I was already gone, erased from the future they were planning. Marcus was busy celebrating. My parents were busy congratulating themselves. And I was busy laying the groundwork. I kept my routine exactly the same. Same bookstore shifts, same bus route, same cheap coffee every morning. If anyone had followed me, they would have seen nothing special. That was the point. But every night, when the city finally quieted down, I worked. I opened spreadsheets, reviewed numbers, answered emails from people who didn't know my real last name, and signed documents that had nothing to do with my family's shrinking world. I had learned early to separate my lives. Elena Carter, the disappointment, and Elena Carter, the woman who paid attention. 3 years earlier back, when I was still sleeping in my car, I had made a decision. I was tired of begging, tired of being scared, tired of needing people who enjoyed watching me struggle. So I started small. I noticed patterns other people ignored. I listened more than I talked. At the bookstore, I heard customers complain about prices, shipping delays, and limited inventory. I watched which books sold out first. I noticed how trends changed before they hit the mainstream. And slowly, quietly, I built something of my own. By the time my family cut me off completely, I already had my first online storefront. Nothing flashy, no personal photos, no social media bragging, just clean transactions and careful growth. They thought I had nothing. In reality, I had patience. One afternoon at work, Mrs. Howard handed me a stack of invoices. "You've got a good head for numbers," she said. "Ever thought about doing more than this place?" I smiled. Every day. She laughed, assuming it was a joke. That night, I checked my accounts again. Revenue was up. Not wildly, not enough to make noise, but enough to confirm what I already knew. I was winning quietly. Meanwhile, my family was getting loud. Marcus posted photos online, champagne glasses, new suits, captions about legacy and building the future. My mother shared pictures of the house with comments about new beginnings. They wanted the world to know they were thriving. People who brag never notice who's listening. Through mutual contacts, I learned more than they realized. The house sale was rushed. Marcus had pushed for aggressive investments. My parents trusted him blindly, the way they always had. He talked fast. He sounded confident. And confidence had always been enough for them. But confidence without caution is just arrogance. One evening, my father called. That alone was unusual. "Elena," he said, stiff and formal. "Marcus mentioned you're doing something online." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. "A little. Is it legitimate?" he asked. I almost laughed. "Yes," I said calmly. "Well," he cleared his throat. "Don't get yourself into trouble. We can't help you." "I know," I replied. He hung up quickly, clearly uncomfortable. He hadn't called to support me. He'd called to reassure himself that I wasn't about to embarrass them. The truth was worse. I wasn't going to embarrass them. I was going to outgrow them. Weeks passed. My operation expanded. New suppliers. Better contracts. I reinvested everything. I didn't upgrade my apartment. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't change a thing anyone could see. Because revenge isn't loud at first. It's quiet. Methodical. Patient. One night, as rain tapped against my window, I opened a file I hadn't touched in months. Inside were notes of family records, business names, company histories. Things I'd gathered back when I still believed knowledge could earn me respect. Now, it had a different purpose. I started connecting dots. Marcus was reckless. My parents were trusting. Their new financial structure had gaps: legal, operational, and ethical. Nothing illegal on my part. Nothing cruel. Just consequences waiting for the right moment. I closed my laptop and stared out into the city lights. They thought chapter 1 of my life ended when they took everything from me. They were wrong. Chapter 2 was the part where I stopped surviving and started positioning myself to win. Asterisk asterisk, there's a moment before things fall apart when everything looks almost perfect. That's the moment people stop being careful. Marcus was living in that moment. I saw it from a distant social media posts, whispers from old family friends, overheard conversations when customers talked too freely at the bookstore. My brother had stepped into the role he'd been waiting for his whole life. The golden son, the successor, the one my parents trusted without question. They called it confidence. I called it carelessness. He had taken control of the family's finances with the enthusiasm of someone who had never been told no. New partnerships, new investments, risky ones. He liked bold moves, big promises, fast returns, everything flashy, everything fragile. I didn't interfere. Not yet. Instead, I watched Dot every night. I made notes, names, timelines, decisions. I didn't need inside access. Marcus talked too much. He bragged to the wrong people. He assumed no one around him was smarter than he was. He'd always assumed that about me. One evening, my mother called again. This time her voice was lighter, almost smug. Marcus is doing very well, she said, as if it were news to me. I'm glad, I replied. He's doubled the value of what we sold already. I hummed softly. That's impressive. She paused. You sound uninterested. I am interested, I said carefully, just not surprised. She didn't like that answer. After the call ended, I stared at my phone for a long moment. I felt nothing, no jealousy, no anger, just focus, because doubling something quickly often meant cutting corners. And corners always come back. At work, I stayed quiet. Customers knew me as the polite girl behind the counter, who remembered their favorite authors. They trusted me without knowing why. People always do when you listen. That skill served me well elsewhere too. I attended events, small ones, professional ones, where no one knew I was related to anyone important. I asked questions. I learned who was funding what, who was desperate, who was lying. Marcus's name came up more often than it should have. Not admiration, concern. He's aggressive, one man said casually at a mixer. Too aggressive. I smiled and said nothing. Another woman leaned in during a coffee break. He doesn't read the fine print. I wrote that down later. At home, my laptop became my world. I reviewed public filings, corporate records, patterns of behavior, everything legal, everything visible if you knew where to look. I wasn't digging for dirt. I was letting gravity do the work. Then came the first sign. Marcus called me. I stared at the screen. Surprised. Elena, he said, overly friendly. Long time. What do you need? I asked. A pause, straight to the point. You didn't call to chat. He laughed. You always were sharp. That almost made me smile. I heard you're doing well, he continued. Well enough, I said. Well, I might have an opportunity for you, he said, lowering his voice as if someone might overhear. Family related. There it was. Go on, I said. He explained quickly too. Quickly, a chance to support one of his ventures. He framed it as generosity, as a way to include me now that I was no longer dependent. He needed liquidity. That told me everything. I'll think about it, I said. Don't wait too long, he replied. Things move fast. I know, I said after we hung up. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. The cracks weren't just showing. They were spreading. Over the next few weeks, the pressure increased. My parents started mentioning money more often. Small complaints, minor worries. Nothing dramatic, but fear has a sound to it if you listen closely. I don't like how rushed everything feels, my mother admitted one night. Marcus knows. What he's doing, my father replied quickly, too quickly. I stayed quiet. That silence had become my greatest weapon. Meanwhile, my own work accelerated. I finalized partnerships I'd been negotiating for months, expanded operations, built safeguards Marcus never bothered with. I wasn't racing him. I was outlasting him. One night, I received an email from a name I recognized immediately. Someone Marcus had dismissed months earlier, a former partner. The message was short. I think we should talk. I stared at the screen, heart steady. This was it, not revenge yet. But the opening. I replied simply, I agree. I didn't sleep much that night, not from nerves, but from clarity. Everything I'd endured, every insult, every dismissal had led me here. They thought they had taken everything from me. What they never understood was this: they had trained me to watch, to wait, to strike only when it mattered. And chapter 3 was the moment I stopped being invisible. The cafe was louder than I expected. Metal chairs scraped the floor. Espresso machines hissed like they were angry at the world. People talked too loudly about things that didn't matter: weekend plans, failed diets, office drama, normal life. The kind of life I used to think I'd never get back after my family decided I was expendable. I arrived early and chose a corner table where I could see the door. When he walked in, I recognized him immediately. Daniel Foster looked tired. Not poor tired, not desperate tired. The kind of tired that comes from watching something you helped build get handed over to someone reckless enough to burn it down. His suit was neat but worn. His eyes were sharp but cautious. He spotted me, hesitated, then walked over. Elena, he asked. Yes. He sat down slowly, studying me. You're not what I expected. I smiled. Neither are you. That broke the tension a little. We ordered coffee. Then we sat there for a moment, both of us measuring how much truth to give away first. He finally spoke. You're Marcus, Carter's sister. I nodded, estranged. He exhaled. That tracks. He didn't waste time. He told me everything, not secrets, mistakes. How Marcus had pushed him out of a partnership. How contracts had been rewritten overnight. How warnings were ignored. How money was moved too fast, without protection. He doesn't think consequences apply to him, Daniel said quietly. People like that always confuse luck for talent. I didn't interrupt. I let him talk until his frustration ran out. When he finished, I asked one question. Did he break the law? Daniel shook his head. No, but he bent trust. That was enough. We parted politely. No promises, no deals. Just an understanding. That night, I didn't rush to act. I thought, revenge isn't about destroying someone in one move. That's too easy, too obvious. Real revenge is about letting people destroy themselves while you control the timing. Meanwhile, my family felt the shift before they understood it. My mother started calling more often, asking subtle questions. Fishing. Are you saving any money? Are you still at that bookstore? You know, Marcus works so hard for all of us. I answered gently, vaguely. Yes, I know. The more uncertain they became, the more they needed to believe Marcus was untouchable. He was their last proof they hadn't failed. But Marcus was unraveling. He showed up at my apartment one evening without warning. I opened the door to find him standing there, smile tight, eyes scanning my space. This is cozy, he said. I stepped aside. What do you want? He didn't sit, just paced. You've been quiet, he said. People notice when someone gets quiet. I'm always quiet. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. You're different, he said. I shrugged. People change. He hesitated. I might need your help. There it was again. How? I asked. Connections, he said vaguely. You seem good with people. I almost laughed. This was the same brother who once told me no one would ever listen to me. I'll think about it. I said. He frowned. You always say that. And you always assume I owe you something. That hit him harder than I expected. He left angry. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, heart pounding not from fear, but from adrenaline. For the first time, he felt it. Not defeat. Loss of control. Over the next month, things moved faster. Deals stalled. Partners hesitated. Questions were asked. Nothing dramatic yet. Just enough friction to slow momentum. Marcus blamed everyone but himself. At a family dinner, my father slammed his fork down. Why are things taking so long? Marcus snapped back. Because people are idiots. My mother looked between us, nervous. Elena, you're quiet. I met her gaze. I'm listening. She didn't like that. Because listening is how you learn where to apply pressure. Late one night, I finalized something I'd been preparing for years. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't an attack. It was independence. A structure that protected me legally, financially, and personally. A future that didn't depend on their approval or their collapse. I stared at the confirmation email for a long time. This was the moment I stopped being reactive. They thought chapter 4 would be the part where I asked for forgiveness. Instead, it was where I took my seat at a table they never thought I belonged at. And they were about to realize something terrifying. I wasn't trying to take Marcus's place. I was building something that would outlast him. The first time my mother showed up at my apartment and announced, I knew things were worse than they were admitting. She stood in the hallway, purse clutched tight, eyes darting like she was afraid someone might overhear us. She used to walk into rooms like she owned them. Now she hovered, uncertain. Elena, she said carefully, can we talk? I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on my couch but didn't relax into it. Her back stayed straight, defensive. That alone told me everything. I won't stay long, she said. Your father's worried. I waited. She cleared her throat. Marcus is under a lot of pressure. I imagine. I said. She frowned. You don't sound sympathetic. I am, I replied. I'm just not surprised. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You know, if you had stayed involved with the family, if you hadn't pushed me out, I said calmly, I might have. That stunned her into silence. She tried again. Marcus mentioned you've been successful. I smiled faintly. Define successful. She hesitated. Enough to help. There it was. Not concern. Not regret. A request. I don't see how that's my responsibility. I said. Her voice sharpened. We're family. I met her eyes. You stopped acting like it years ago. She left angry, but afraid. That night, my phone rang again this time. My father. Your mother says you refused to help, he said flatly. I refused to be used. I corrected. He sighed. Marcus made mistakes. Yes, I said. He did. And now he lives with them. Silence. For the first time, my parents were facing the consequences of choosing a favorite. Meanwhile, Marcus unraveled. He called me late. At night, voice tight, temper short. He blamed partners, the market, everyone except himself. You think you're better than me now? He snapped once. No, I said. I think I'm careful. That shut him up. At work, life changed too. The bookstore was no longer my safety net, it was my cover. I trained a replacement quietly, reduced my shifts, prepared my exit without drama. Mrs. Howard noticed but didn't question it. You're going somewhere, she said one day. Yes, I replied. Finally. The real shift came when a familiar name crossed my inbox again. Daniel. He forwarded me documents, not accusations, not secrets, just timelines. Evidence of patterns. Proof of mismanagement that investors were starting to notice on their own. I didn't leak anything. I didn't warn anyone. I let natural consequences breathe. Then the call came. Marcus was being investigated, not criminally. Not yet, but financially. Audits, reviews, delays, everything he hated. The family gathered without me. I knew because my mother called afterward, voice trembling. "This is bad," she whispered. "He could lose everything." I looked around my apartment, clean, quiet, mine. I already did. I said softly. That was when she cried. Not for me, for the image of the son she built her life around. I felt nothing but relief, because the truth was finally out. I was never weak. I was just waiting. The first headline didn't mention my name. That was intentional. It mentioned Marcus. Rising air faces scrutiny after investors pull back. You read it on my phone. While standing in line for coffee, the same way I read everything else, quietly, carefully, without expression. The barista called my order. I paid. I stepped aside. Life went on around me, unaware that something huge had just shifted. Marcus had always believed attention meant admiration. He never learned the difference. By noon, there were 3 more articles. By evening, people were whispering instead of praising. Former allies suddenly couldn't comment. Friends stopped answering his calls. That's how it always starts, not with explosions, but with distance. My parents called me together this time. Both of them. We met at a neutral place. A restaurant they chose because it made them feel important. White tablecloths, quiet music, the illusion of control. My mother looked smaller. My father looked older. "Elena," my father said, voice tight, "this situation has gotten out of hand." I folded my napkin calmly. "How so?" "Marcus is being treated unfairly," my mother snapped. "People are turning on him." "No," I said evenly. "People are paying attention." That angered her more than shouting ever could. "You could help," she insisted. "You know people. You understand business." I met her gaze. "You didn't believe that when it mattered." Silence stretched. Then my father asked the question that changed everything. "How much do you have?" I didn't answer. "Enough," I said finally. That word landed hard. My mother's face shifted, not anger, not denial. Fear. For the first time, they saw me not as a failure, but as a variable they hadn't accounted for. Marcus didn't take it as well. He showed up at my apartment again, this time furious. "You did this?" he accused. I crossed my arms. "I didn't make you reckless. You talked to people," he said. "You poisoned them." I listened. I replied. "They decided." He stared at me, breathing hard. "You think you won," he said bitterly. I shook my head. "This isn't about winning." "Then what is it about?" I held his gaze, steady and calm. Accountability. That word broke something in him. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. My parents' house didn't sell the way they'd planned. Investments froze. Assets tied up. The lifestyle they built around Marcus began shrinking. Quietly, painfully. And me? I stepped forward. Not loudly, not dramatically. I registered my company publicly for the first time, accepted an invitation to speak at an industry event, shook hands with people who had once ignored me completely. They listened now, not because of revenge, because I was prepared. One evening, as I stood on a balcony overlooking the city, phone buzzing with messages from people who suddenly wanted meetings, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not satisfaction. Freedom. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply stopped sacrificing myself to protect their illusion, and in doing so, I had finally become visible. Asterisk asterisk, there's a strange moment when power changes hands. It doesn't come with applause. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, almost politely, like everyone suddenly agreeing to sit differently without saying why. That was happening to me. I noticed it the first time someone used my full name in a room full of people who mattered. Elena Carter, the moderator said, glancing at his notes, has been instrumental in stabilizing several projects during recent market turbulence. I was seated near the front, notebook on my lap, posture calm. No nerves, no rush of ego, just awareness across the room, heads turned, not curious glances, respectful ones. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I nodded once and kept listening. That restraint mattered more than any speech could have, because confidence doesn't explain itself. After the panel, people approached me in small groups. They didn't interrupt. They waited. They asked questions instead of making statements. They spoke carefully, like they didn't want to waste my time. I had never been treated like that before. Not by strangers. Not by my family. Especially not by Marcus. His calls stopped entirely. At first, I assumed it was pride. Then I realized it was fear. People like Marcus don't go quiet when they're angry. They go quiet when they're cornered. When the narrative slips out of their hands, and it had. The articles changed tone. No longer Marcus Carter's vision. Under review. Now it was new leadership stabilizes sector after aggressive expansion fails. They didn't mention me by name at first, but they quoted sources close to the restructuring. I was fine with that. Let Marcus wonder. At home, my parents were unraveling in slow motion. My mother called daily now. Sometimes she left voicemails she later deleted. Apologies wrapped in excuses. Regrets softened by self-preservation. I didn't know, she said once, voice breaking. I thought I was doing what was best, she said another time. I didn't correct her, because the truth wasn't complicated. She had chosen comfort over fairness, praise over honesty, the son who made her feel important over the daughter who made her feel challenged. And now that choice had a cost. My father tried a different approach. He invited me to lunch, chose a quiet place, paid before the check arrived, like he used to. When I was a kid and thought gestures meant love, Elena, he said carefully, things have shifted. I waited. You've done well, he admitted. Better than we expected. That stung more than an insult. Thank you, I said. He leaned forward. We need to discuss the future. I met his eyes. My future, I said, is already decided. He frowned. You don't want to reconcile. I'm not angry, I said calmly. I'm done negotiating my worth. That was the moment. He understood. Not fully, but enough. Marcus didn't get that chance. He cornered me after an event, waiting until the crowd thinned. His suit looked expensive. His eyes looked hollow. You planned this, he said. No, I replied. I prepared for it. He laughed bitterly. You're enjoying this. I shook my head. You still don't understand. Then explain. He snapped. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice, not threatening, just honest. I'm not taking anything from you, I said. I'm just not carrying you anymore. That broke him, because he'd always assumed I was holding him up. That night, I went home alone, poured a glass of water, and stood by the window watching the city glow. Messages stacked up on my phone, requests, congratulations, questions. I ignored them for a moment. Instead, I thought about the girl who used to sit silently at family dinners, the one who learned to disappear to survive. She hadn't vanished. She'd been sharpening herself. And now the world was finally saying my name. Power doesn't feel the way people imagine. It isn't loud. It doesn't rush. It sits quietly in your chest and waits for you to decide how to use it. That was where I was when my mother asked me to come home. Not asked, requested. Carefully. Worded. Polite. Afraid. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The same walls. The same framed photos. Marcus at graduations. Marcus shaking hands. Marcus smiling beside my parents like proof they'd done something right. I wasn't in most of them. When I stood slightly to the side, half-cropped. Like an afterthought. We sat in the living room. All three of us. Marcus arrived last. He didn't look at me at first. My mother spoke quickly, like if she slowed down, she'd lose her nerve. We need to talk about the past. I almost smiled. The past was the one thing they never wanted to talk about when it mattered. My father cleared his throat. Mistakes were made. Marcus scoffed quietly. I waited. My mother finally looked at me. We were wrong about you. There it was. Not an apology. Not really. An admission shaped by necessity. I don't need you to be right now, I said gently. I needed you to be fair back then. Marcus snapped. You always do this act. Like a victim. I turned to him slowly. You took everything, I said. And still, somehow, you're angry. He stood. Because you're enjoying watching me fall. No. I replied. I'm watching you refuse to stand up. Silence crushed the room. My father spoke quietly. What do you want, Elena? That question mattered. Because I could have asked for anything. Money, control, public acknowledgement, ownership. Instead, I said, I want you to stop pretending I owe you reconciliation. My mother's eyes filled with tears. Marcus looked stunned. I didn't destroy this family. I continued. I survived it. There's a difference. For the first time, no one argued. That scared them more than anger ever had. After that night, something broke cleanly, not explosively. Clean breaks are the ones that last. Marcus stepped away from public roles. Not dramatic, quiet resignations, quiet exits. My parents downsized without announcing it. Their world shrank into something manageable, something honest. They stopped calling every day. That mattered. As for me, I didn't step into the spotlight they expected. I declined interviews. I redirected attention. I chose stability over spectacle. Because revenge isn't about humiliation. It's about closure. One evening, months later, I sat alone in my apartment, the same one, upgraded only where it mattered. I opened the folder on my laptop again. Private. This time, it didn't feel like armor. It felt like history. I closed it. I thought about the girl who stayed silent at the table, the one they mistook for weak, the one who learned that being underestimated was the greatest advantage she'd ever have. I didn't need them to suffer. I needed to be free. And I was. I arrived at the family estate before sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. It was the kind of evening that made people nostalgic, but nostalgia was a dangerous luxury. When the past had been cruel, I walked up the front steps slowly, heels clicking on the marble. Every step echoed the years I had spent walking quietly through their judgment, absorbing insults, storing humiliation like a secret weapon. When I opened the door, the house smelled the same lavender air freshener my mother loved, mixed with the faint scent of polish and old money, the kind of scent that says everything looks perfect, but nothing beneath is as it seems. I was greeted by my father first. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My mother hovered nearby, wringing her hands like a nervous schoolgirl. And Marcus, he didn't even look at me. He stood near the fireplace, posture stiff, suit slightly wrinkled, expensive tie crooked. For the first time, he seemed small. You're here, my mother said, almost a question. I am, I replied softly, stepping into the room. Why did you agree to come? Marcus finally muttered, his voice a mix of anger and something I couldn't name. He was trying to regain control, but it was slipping through his fingers like sand. I wanted to talk, I said, and I wanted you to listen. He laughed bitterly. You've always been good at talking. Too good. I've always been quiet, I corrected. But the quiet doesn't mean nothing. It means I was watching, learning, preparing. They flinched slightly, the words hitting harder than any accusation could. We sat in the living room, a tense circle. The kind of room where I had spent countless nights as a child, shrinking in my chair, trying not to breathe too loud. But tonight, I wasn't shrinking. I was taking the space that had been denied to me for so long. My mother spoke first. Elena, we were wrong. Not an apology, just an admission, a crack in the armor. I don't need apologies, I said. I needed fairness when it mattered. My father cleared his throat, eyes flicking nervously between Marcus and me. We thought Marcus was ready to handle everything. We didn't realize. You didn't realize I existed as a person. I said. Silence. Marcus finally looked at me, eyes wide, something like fear flickering there. You're not angry. I smiled faintly. I'm not angry. I'm aware, and I'm patient. Patient? He asked, incredulous. Yes, patient, I repeated, because patience lets you see things clearly. And when you see things clearly, you make decisions based on reality, not ego. Marcus's face tightened. My parents shifted in their seats. They didn't like the calm. Calm was dangerous. Calm meant control. Calm meant I had already won without lifting a finger. I stood up and walked slowly toward the window. Do you know what I kept all these years? I asked, my voice low but steady. Not money, not connections, not even grudges. I kept my focus, my strategy, my mind, and everything else you took. Everything else was yours to ruin. The room felt heavy. They couldn't look at each other. They couldn't look at me. I've built everything quietly, I continued. Everything you think you control, Marcus. You've been managing poorly. I've been patient. I've watched. And now, I turned to face them fully, gaze unwavering. Now you're learning the hard way what happens when you underestimate me. Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. My father's hands twitched. My mother swallowed hard. You had choices, I said, pacing slowly. You could have treated me like a person. You could have respected my boundaries. You could have accepted that I didn't need your approval to exist. But you didn't. And now, I paused, letting the words settle like stones in the room. Now you're paying for those choices in every subtle way, every quiet consequence, every moment you didn't see coming. I stopped and faced them squarely. I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to show you that actions have results, and for years, I bore them silently. Now, I don't have to. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. My parents, who had always been untouchable in their own minds, were exposed. Marcus, who had always mocked me, had no weapons left. Every snide comment, every condescending laugh, every moment of dismissal, they were all reflected back at him now, not by me, but by the world he had failed to see. I walked toward the door. This isn't revenge in the way you think. This is just truth. And truth eventually arrives, whether you acknowledge it or not. Before leaving, I turned once more. I forgave myself a long time ago. You'll need time to forgive your own ignorance. I walked out, quietly, calmly, free. The moment I closed the door behind me, I realized it was the first time I had ever stepped fully into my own life, without waiting for anyone's permission. And it was intoxicating. By now, Marcus had begun to crumble publicly. Not in a dramatic scandal, he was too careful for that, but in subtle, relentless ways. The kind of fall no one notices at first, but everyone feels. Partners withdrew trust. Investors questioned. Decisions. Deals that once seemed inevitable stalled or disappeared. And I watched it quietly. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't celebrating. I was observing. Every stumble, every hesitation, every misstep, they were all predictable consequences of the arrogance I had endured for years. One evening, my father called, voice tight. "Elena, Marcus is asking for your help. Can you guide him?" I didn't need to pause. I knew exactly what he meant. I smiled faintly. "He doesn't need guidance," I said. "He needs accountability. And accountability isn't something I give freely." My mother whispered in the background, guilt dripping from every syllable. "Please, he's your brother." I leaned back in my chair, calm and collected. I know he's my brother, but family doesn't excuse poor decisions. It doesn't erase years of neglect. It doesn't make me responsible for fixing what you chose to ignore. Silence followed. My words landed harder than any argument ever could. Then came the public acknowledgement. A quiet headline. Carter Investments faces scrutiny. Leadership in question. The story didn't mention my role. That wasn't the point. The point was that the world finally noticed the cracks Marcus had ignored for so long. And I had positioned myself far enough away to remain untouched. That night, I realized something crucial. Revenge isn't about destroying someone, it's about emerging intact while the world corrects itself. Wrong you. And I was intact. Asterisk, I never thought freedom would feel like this quiet. But absolute. By the time I returned to the city, the world had shifted in ways that didn't announce themselves in headlines. Marcus's empire had quietly crumbled. Not because I had crushed it, but because he had built it on assumptions, arrogance, and the blind loyalty of parents who refused to see the truth. My parents called me once more, a hesitant attempt at reconciliation. "Elena," my mother whispered, voice trembling. I don't know how to fix this." I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman who had held herself above me for years, who had treated me like I didn't belong. There was fear now, a sharp, unpolished fear that spoke louder than any apology could. "Fix this?" I asked. "There's nothing to fix." Her eyes widened. She expected rage. She expected drama. She did not expect calm. She did not expect me to be whole. I survived. I continued. I've always survived. And now I thrive. My father opened his mouth, but words failed him. The truth was simple, and nothing he could say would change it. I was no longer the responsibility. I was no longer the daughter who took their judgment quietly. I was the woman who had turned every insult, every slight, every humiliation into fuel. Marcus arrived that evening too. His presence felt smaller than ever, not because of me, but because he had lost the pedestal he'd built his entire life upon. You're unstoppable," he muttered, more to himself than to me. I shook my head. "I'm not unstoppable. I'm prepared. There's a difference." His anger flared, but it lacked focus. He tried to dominate the conversation, to justify his failures, to remind me of past debts and imagined slights. I let him speak. I let him unravel. Every sentence he spat was proof of his own arrogance. Every accusation a reminder of what he had lost by ignoring me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even gloat. I simply watched. Because by this point, the real victory wasn't in words. It wasn't in money. It wasn't in power over them. It was in silence. Silence had been my weapon for years. The quiet patience they mocked and ignored had given me insight, strategy, and endurance. And now, That silence roared louder than their anger ever could. I stepped forward. You had your chance to see me, I said slowly. You didn't. You underestimated me. You relied on appearances, on assumptions, on the idea that the quiet girl could never change the world. And now, here I am, whole, free, and unshakable. My mother turned away, unable to meet my gaze. My father bowed his head. Marcus clenched his fists. But I didn't wait for reactions. I walked to the balcony. The city lights stretched out before me, glittering, infinite, alive. I poured myself a glass of wine and breathed in the night air. This was my life now, mine alone. The next morning, I opened my laptop. Contracts, partnerships, investments, emails confirming deals that would secure my independence forever. I had worked for this moment quietly, deliberately, over years. Every failure they forced me to endure, every humiliation, every dismissal, they had shaped me into someone who could survive, thrive, and rise above. And I did. A week later, the public noticed. Articles mentioned my role indirectly. Elena Carter quietly stabilizes sectors in crisis. The woman behind the scenes who no one saw coming. Silent strategist reshapes outcomes while her family falters. The words didn't thrill me. I didn't need recognition. I had already earned it where it mattered most, in my own hands, in my own life. I took a walk that evening, alone, along the river. The water reflected the city lights like a mirror of possibilities. I thought of the girl I had once been, the one who stayed silent at family dinners, who watched her brother be praised for doing nothing extraordinary, who endured every insult without defense. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had waited, planned, and acted with precision. A woman who had learned the most powerful lessons of all. Respect is earned, not given. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. The world does not owe you recognition, but it does respond to preparation, patience, and determination. Revenge is not about destruction, it is about emerging intact, powerful, and free. I stopped at the edge of the river and breathed deeply. The wind brushed my face, carrying the scent of the city, of opportunity, of life reclaimed. And for the first time in decades, I felt nothing but peace. The family that had tried to humiliate me, to erase me, to hold me back, they were left to face the consequences of their choices. I didn't need to intervene. I didn't need to remind them of the pain they caused. I simply stepped forward, fully alive, fully independent, and fully unafraid. The sun dipped below the horizon. The city lights sparkled in the growing darkness. And I knew, finally, that the girl who had stayed silent was gone forever. In her place was someone unstoppable, not because she destroyed, but because she survived, thrived, and chose freedom. I raised my glass to the night, to myself, to the truth, and I smiled, because this was the life I had earned.